The scream came from above, and Silas Morgan nearly dropped both buckets into the ravine. It was not a human scream. It was lower, wetter, the kind of sound that made the hair on his arms stand up even through the sweat-soaked wool of his shirt. He froze on the narrow switchback trail, the wooden yoke biting into his shoulders, 40 pounds of river water sloshing at either end, and looked up through the pines toward the ruined watchtower on the ridge. A shape came crashing down through the brush above him, antlered and clawed and wrong in a way that no honest animal should be, and Silas had just enough time to think that this was how he was going to die, 3 weeks into carrying water up a mountain for an exiled orc scout who was not even supposed to want him there, when a second shape hit the first one broadside and drove it screaming off the trail into the dark. He heard the fight before he saw it, snarling, the crack of a spear haft against bone. A low, furious voice snarling curses in the guttural old orc tongue, and then, blessedly, in the common speech, because she knew he would not understand her rage otherwise. Move, Silas Morgan, down the path now, unless you want to be its second meal. He did not move. He set the yoke down instead, carefully, because spilling the water after climbing an hour with it seemed suddenly like the greater tragedy, and he snatched up the long boat hook he carried strapped across his back out of old habit from his ferryman days, and he ran toward the sound of the fighting instead of away from it. He found her locked in a brutal wrestling match with the thing, one clawed hand fisted in its matted hide, her spear snapped in half at her feet, her other arm bleeding freely from 3 parallel gashes that looked like they had been drawn with a rake made of knives. She was magnificent, even half covered in her own blood, green-gray skin gleaming with sweat in the moonlight, her dark hair bound back in a single thick braid that had come half undone in the struggle, her fitted leather scout leathers torn at the shoulder. She did not need him. She had never once needed him, not really, not for anything but water. But he came anyway, boat hook raised, and drove the iron point into the creature's flank with all the strength his ferryman's arms could give it. The beast shrieked, reared, and Bula Bloodhorn seized the opening he had given her, and buried a long hunting knife to the hilt behind its foreleg. It went down thrashing, and then it went still, and the mountain went quiet again except for the two of them breathing hard in the dark. "You fool," she said, chest heaving, turning to look at him with eyes the color of amber caught in firelight. "You could have run." "I know," Silas said. "You should have run. I know that too." She looked at him for a long moment, orc and man standing over the corpse of something neither of them had a name for yet, and something shifted behind her eyes that he did not understand until much later. Then she said, gruffly, "Your water is spilled on the trail." "I'll fetch more," Silas Morgan said, and went to get the yoke. That was the first night the water carrying nearly killed him. It was also, though neither of them would have said so aloud in that moment, the night it stopped being an act of pity and became something else entirely. To understand why a ferryman was climbing a mountain in the dark with buckets on a yoke to bring water to a woman who could tear a monster apart with her bare hands, you would have to go back a little more than a month, to the day the army came and sat down outside the walls of Fenwater Crossing like a great gray beast settling in to wait out a long winter. Silas Morgan had run the ferry at Fenwater Crossing for 6 years, ever since his father's knees gave out and the old man handed him the pole and the flat-bottomed barge they called the Gray Lily, and told him the river did not care whose hands held the rudder so long as the hands were steady. Silas's hands were steady. He was not a large man, not broad through the shoulder the way the blacksmith or the guard captain were, but he was strong in the way that came from years of poling a loaded barge against current, and he was patient in the way that came from spending long hours alone on moving water with nothing but his own thoughts for company. He had never married. There had been a girl once, years back, who had looked past him for a wealthier man, and after that Silas had simply stopped looking, and folks in Fenwater had gotten used to seeing him alone at the tavern corner, nursing 1 cup of ale and speaking to no one unless spoken to first. Then Clan Ashgrim's war host came down out of the eastern passes, 4,000 strong by the town crier's frightened count, and camped across the river on the far bank where the trade road forked, and the gray lily had nowhere left to sail. The bridge upstream was burned by the town's own garrison to slow the advance. The river crossing below the walls was watched day and night by orc pickets with black-fletched arrows. Fenwater Crossing, a walled market town of some 2,000 souls that had never known worse than a bad harvest or a bandit scare, found itself besieged, and Silas Morgan found himself, for the first time in his adult life, a man with a boat and nowhere to take it. It was during the second week of the siege that the town scouts dragged an orc woman in through the postern gate, half-starved, wrists bound, having been found collapsed at the edge of the tree line a mile upstream where she had no business being if she served the army camped across the water. She had fought them, they said, until she simply could not fight any more, and even bound and bleeding she had not begged. Her name, she told the council when they questioned her in the town hall, was Bula Bloodhorn, and she had been the finest scout in Clan Ashgrim until 3 weeks prior, when warlord Goreth Ashgrim himself had exiled her for refusing to put a family of fleeing farmers to the sword during a raid on a border homestead. Exile in the orc clans was not banishment with a horse and provisions. It was a slower thing. It was meant to kill you without anyone having to dirty a blade, out in the wild with no clan and no claim, and no right to beg mercy of anyone, orc or human. The town council had argued for 2 days about what to do with her. Half wanted her hanged from the gate as a warning to the army outside. Half, led by the Reeve Aldous Pike, a cautious gray-bearded man who had buried 2 sons in the last orc war and did not relish burying more of his townsfolk now, argued that killing a scout who knew the enemy's dispositions, their supply lines, their watch rotations, was a waste that could cost them the siege. In the end they had settled on something that satisfied neither side and pleased no one. They would exile her a second time, sending her up to the old ruined signal tower on the ridge above the town, a half-day's climb, to serve as an early warning sentry against any attack from the mountain side, useful if she chose to be useful, and if she died up there of exposure or thirst, well, that was no crime the town would answer for. No one was permitted to bring her food or aid on pain of the stocks. The old spring near the tower had collapsed in a rockfall 2 winters past. There was no water up there at all. Silas had been standing at the back of the hall the day that sentence was read, having come only to see if the council would spare a coin for men whose livelihoods the siege had drowned, and something about the flat, contemptuous certainty with which the council spoke of a woman's slow death by thirst had lodged in his chest like a fishhook and would not come loose. He told himself for 3 days that it was none of his business. He told himself the orcs outside the walls were the reason his boat sat useless and his coin purse grew thin, that an orc was an orc whatever her crime, that half the town would call him a fool or worse if they knew what he was thinking. He told himself all of that, and on the 4th night he filled 2 buckets from the town well, hung them on the yoke his father had used for hauling nets, and started up the mountain trail in the dark so that no one would see him go. He found her exactly where the council had left her, in the lee of the ruined signal tower, sitting with her back against cold stone, watching the trail with a hunting knife loose in her hand and hatred plain in her amber eyes when his lantern light found her. "Come to finish what your council started, ferryman," she had said, and he remembered even now how her voice had cracked slightly on the last word, dry-throated, though her pride had not let her ask for what she needed. "Come to bring you water," he had said instead, and set the buckets down at a careful distance, and stepped back with his hands open and empty, so she could see he carried nothing else, and then he had turned and walked back down the mountain without waiting to see if she would drink it or dash it against the rocks in fury. He did not know that first night if she had drunk it at all. He only knew that the next evening he filled the buckets again and climbed again, and this time she was standing when his lantern found her, arms crossed over the torn leather of her travel gear, watching him come with an expression he could not read in the dark. Why? She had asked, not moving to take the water. Would a man of Fenwater carry water up a mountain for an orc his own people threw away like spoiled meat? Silas had set the buckets down and thought about lying, about saying something noble and easy, and found he did not have it in him. Because nobody deserves to die thirsty for wanting to save children, he had said. That's what they told the council you did. Refuse to kill a family. Seemed to me that's not a crime worth dying for. Not up here alone with no one even to see it. She had been quiet a long time. Then she had crossed the distance between them, taken the buckets herself, and said only, Bula Bloodhorn, as if that settled something, as if a name given freely was worth more than any thanks, and Silas had understood, without either of them saying so, that he would be climbing that mountain again the next night, and the night after that. And so he had, every single day for nearly a month, through rain that turned the trail to a river of mud, through a morning so cold his breath froze on his beard, through the ache that settled permanently into his shoulders from the yoke. He brought water first, because that was the need that could kill her fastest, but he began bringing other things too. Dried fish from what little the town's stores could spare. A blanket he claimed to have found, though everyone who knew him would have recognized it from his own bed. A whetstone for her broken spear, once he'd gathered the courage to ask if she wanted one. Small things, human things. And in exchange, in the slow accumulating way that trust builds between two people who have decided, separately and then together, to stop being afraid of each other, Bula Bloodhorn began giving him things too. She taught him to read the wind by the way it moved through pine needles. She showed him the tracks of a mountain cat, and told him which plants a man could eat if the town's stores ever failed entirely. She laughed once at something he said about the Reeve's terrible singing voice, and the sound of her laughter, low and startled out of her like she hadn't used it in a long while, had done something to Silas Morgan's heart that he did not have a word for yet. He had never told the council he was still climbing. He had never told anyone at all. It became, without either of them ever naming it as such, a secret they held together, the two of them and the mountain and the water yoke, a private world that belonged to no army and no council, and no old hatred between their two peoples. It was 3 nights after the fight with the beast that Silas began to understand just how much danger that secret world was actually in. He came up the trail at his usual hour, buckets sloshing, calling out softly the way he always did now so she would know it was him and not lower her spear at a stranger's shadow, and found Bula Bloodhorn crouched at the tower's edge, still favoring the arm the beast had clawed, staring down not at the town below but eastward, toward the smoke of the besieging army's cook fires. Something's wrong, Silas said, setting the yoke down. Someone's coming, she said, and her voice had gone flat and careful in a way he had learned to recognize as fear disguised as calm. I have seen him twice tonight already, working the tree line below the ridge. He moves like Clan. He moves like a scout who knows exactly where he's going. Could be one of the town's watchmen. Town watchmen do not carry Ashgrim spear marks on their hide packs, ferryman. She said it without heat, but he heard the old bitterness under it, the wound of exile that never quite closed. It's one of mine, was one of mine. He had barely opened his mouth to ask what that meant when a shape stepped out of the tree line below the ruined tower's wall, moonlight catching on the curved horns bound in bronze at his temples, and Bula Bloodhorn rose to her feet with her whole body gone rigid. "Gruck," she said. The orc who came up the last stretch of slope was built like a fortress wall, broader through the chest than Silas Morgan would ever be, his tusks filed to points in the fashion of clan warriors who wanted every enemy to know his rank at a glance. He carried a heavy axe loose across his back, and moved with the easy, arrogant confidence of a man who had never once in his life had to wonder if he belonged somewhere. His eyes found Bula first, and something in his expression softened briefly, before it hardened again when he saw Silas standing beside her with a water yoke at his feet. "So the stories are true," Gruk said, in the common tongue, deliberately, so the human standing there could understand every word of the insult he intended. Bloodhorn, greatest scout the clan ever bred, fetching water like a pack mule from a soft-handed river rat. I fetch nothing, Bula said. He brings it. There is a difference, Gruk, though I don't expect a warrior with your imagination to grasp it. Gorath is dead, Gruk said, ignoring the barb, and something flickered across Bula's face that Silas had never seen there before, something that looked almost like hope before she crushed it down. Killed by his own second in a challenge over the failure to take this town in a single season, the clan council is scattered. There is no warlord to hold your exile anymore, Bloodhorn. You could come back. I would speak for you. I have always spoken for you if you would only have listened to me before all this foolishness with the farmers. The farmers were children, Gruk. The farmers were the enemy. They were children, she said again, softer this time but no less iron. And I have never once regretted refusing to gut them for Gorath's pride, and I never will, dead warlord or no. She stepped closer to him, and Silas watched the way Gruk's whole body leaned toward her, the way a man leans toward a fire he has been cold without for a long time. Why are you really here? To bring you home, Gruk said, and then lower in a voice that made no attempt to hide what it was, to claim what should have been mine before you ever went and got yourself thrown out for a human family's sake. I have waited, Bula. I did not take another mate. I told the elders I was still deciding. I was waiting for you. Silas felt something cold and unfamiliar twist in his chest, and he recognized it with some surprise as jealousy, sharp and possessive and entirely unbecoming of a man who had no claim on anything. He had no right to feel it. He had brought this woman water because it was decent, because no one deserved to die of thirst alone on a mountain, and somewhere in a month of climbing, he had let himself want things he had no business wanting from a scout of the clan that was starving his whole town out behind its walls. But the feeling came anyway, hot and unwelcome, and he found himself stepping half a pace closer to her without quite deciding to. Bula Bloodhorn looked at Gruk for a long moment. Then she looked at Silas Morgan, standing there with mud on his boots and water sloshing at his feet and nothing to offer any orc that a warrior like Gruk could not offer tenfold, and something in her face settled, decided, final. I am not yours to claim, Gruk Ironjaw, she said. I was never yours, and I have found up on this miserable rock the elders threw me onto to die, something I did not expect to find at all. She reached out without hesitation, without apology, and rested her hand against Silas Morgan's chest, over his heart, in front of the rival warrior and the moon and the whole wide dark mountain. This one. This soft-handed river rat who climbed a mountain every night for a month for a woman who gave him nothing but insults in return. I choose him. Gruk's jaw worked. His hand tightened on the axe haft, and for one terrible heartbeat Silas thought the man might simply cut him down where he stood and be done with the insult. But whatever else Gruk Ironjaw was, he was orc-bred, and orc law was clear enough even to Silas, who had only ever heard it second-hand. A claim spoken freely by an unbound woman in front of a witness could not be contested by force without shaming the challenger before every clan that ever heard the tale. He will not last, Gruk said finally, low, bitter. Humans do not last, Bloodhorn. You will bury him in 30 years and still have 100 left to walk alone. Then I will have had 30 years worth having, Bula said, which is more than you offered me in all the years I wasted waiting to see if you would ever be brave enough to say what you just said tonight instead of hiding behind an axe and a title. Gruk stared at her, and at Silas, and something in his broad face crumpled just slightly before he mastered it. Then he turned without another word and went back down into the tree line, and the mountain was quiet again. Silas realized, once the sound of Gruk's passage had faded entirely, that his heart was pounding as hard as it had during the fight with the beast 3 nights before. You didn't have to say that, he managed. You didn't have to choose anything tonight in front of him. I'd have understood if... Silas Morgan. Bula's hand was still on his chest, And now she stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, close enough that he had to tilt his face up to hold her gaze. Do you know what it means among my people for a woman to say those words in front of a rival? It is not a small thing. It is not a kindness offered lightly. I don't know your customs, he admitted. I only know I didn't much like watching him look at you like you belonged to him. I don't belong to anyone, she said, though there was no anger in it now, only a low warmth that made his pulse stumble. I choose. I have always chosen. I chose to refuse Gorath's order, though it cost me everything I had. And tonight I choose you, not because you brought me water, though the water kept me alive long enough to have the choosing at all, but because in a month of climbing that mountain you have never once asked me for anything in return. Not gratitude, not softness, not even my name that first night, though I gave it to you anyway. I wanted to know it, Silas said. I wanted to know you. That's different from asking for something. Yes, Bula Bloodhorn said, and there was something fierce and hungry in her amber eyes now that had nothing to do with fear or hatred at all. It is very different. She kissed him then, there on the ridge above the ruined tower, with the moon high and the beast's blood still dried dark on her leather sleeve and Gruck's rejected pride still fading into the trees below. And Silas Morgan, who had spent 6 years alone with nothing but a pole and a barge and his own quiet thoughts for company, felt for the first time in longer than he could remember that he was not, in fact, alone at all. It was hungry and startling, and entirely unlike anything he had let himself imagine on all those climbs up the mountain, her hand fisting in the front of his shirt, his own hands finally daring to find the curve of her waist through the worn leather of her travel gear. And when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing like they had run the whole trail rather than simply stood still at the top of it. There will be difficulty, Bula said, once she had recovered enough breath to be practical again. Your council will not welcome this. My own kind will call me worse than exile now. And there is still a beast loose on this mountain that nearly took my arm off 3 nights past, and an army camped across your river that will not simply go home because a scout has fallen in love with a ferryman. I know it, Silas said. I've known most of it since before I climbed up here the first night. And still you came. Still I came, he agreed. And I mean to keep coming, difficulty or not, army or not, monster or not. I told you already why, Bula. Seemed to me nobody deserved to die thirsty. Turns out I meant it a lot more than I understood at the time. She laughed, that low startled sound he had come to treasure more than almost anything else in his narrowing world, and pulled him close again. And for a little while the war outside the walls and the beast in the dark and the whole complicated tangle of clan and council and old hatred simply fell away, and there was only the mountain, and the two of them, and the water yoke resting forgotten at their feet. The beast did not stay forgotten for long. 4 nights after Gruck's visit, a sentry on the town's north wall vanished between one patrol and the next, leaving behind only a dropped lantern and a smear of blood on the parapet that made the guard captain, a hard, humorless man named Rennick Vane, order the whole watch doubled. 2 nights after that, an outrider from the besieging army was found torn open a half-mile from the enemy camp, and rumor ran through both the town and the camp beyond the walls like wildfire, each side certain the other had loosed some cursed thing upon them. Bula knew better within a day of hearing the second report from Silas's own mouth, and her certainty frightened him more than any rumor had. It hunts the ridge, she said, pacing the small floor of the ruined tower's one intact chamber, where they had taken, in recent nights, to sitting together after his climb, sharing whatever food he had managed to bring. It came down from the high caves because the war has filled the whole mountain with the smell of blood and butchered meat, and it does not care whose blood, town, or camp. It will keep taking men from both sides until someone stops it, and no one will believe the warning if it comes from an exile's mouth. They might believe it from mine, Silas said, though he did not sound certain even to himself. They will believe you climbed a mountain and got lucky against one wounded creature, Bula said, not unkindly. They will not believe you can predict where it hunts next, because you cannot, not without me. And they will not let me inside their walls to tell them myself. Your Reeve exiled me to die quietly, Silas. He will not welcome me back to save the very town that sentenced me. Then we don't ask him, Silas said, an idea forming with the particular stubbornness of a man who has already decided he will not lose the woman he loves to a monster he has some hope of fighting. We hunt it ourselves. You know its habits better than anyone alive. I know this mountain and this river better than any soldier in that camp or on that wall. We find it before it finds anyone else, and we end it quietly, the way we've done everything else this past month. Bula studied him for a long moment, something warm and fierce and faintly disbelieving in her expression, as though she still could not quite credit that a man built for poling barges down a slow river meant to stand against a creature that had already torn through both an army outrider and a trained town sentry. You would do this, she said. Truly. Not for the town, not even only for me. Because it is the right thing, and because you are, Silas Morgan, entirely too stubborn for your own good. Learned it from someone, Silas said, and nodded at her, and she laughed and swatted his shoulder hard enough to nearly knock him from his seat. And that, more than any oath sworn on a blade, was how they came to hunt the beast together. They spent the better part of 2 nights simply tracking it, Bula reading sign in the moss and broken branches that Silas would have walked past without a second glance, until she found what she was looking for. A wide, shallow cave mouth on the mountain's western face, above a steep gorge where the river narrowed to a churning white channel before dropping toward the town's water mill. The beast, she explained, was a creature of the high dark, a hunter that struck from ambush and dragged its kills back to feed in private, and it favored the gorge's updrafts to mask its scent from prey below. If we can drive it onto the old mill bridge, Silas said, studying the gorge in the gray pre-dawn light, the footing's rotten there. Half the planks are cracked already. I've poled under that bridge 100 times and always wondered why the town hasn't fixed it. A creature that size, moving fast, chasing something it wants badly enough. It would go through the boards, Bula finished, understanding lighting her amber eyes, into the gorge, into the white water, and even a beast that size would not survive that channel unbroken. We'd need bait it wanted badly enough to run flat out without looking where it stepped. Bula looked at him, and something in her expression made his stomach drop even before she spoke. It has taken men. It has not yet taken an orc. I do not think that is chance, Silas. I think it has learned the smell of clan blood means a harder fight than it wants for its trouble, that it prefers easier prey. It will run from me. It will not run so fast from you. Then I'll be the one on the bridge, Silas said, before he had quite finished thinking it through, because it was obvious, because it was the only plan that made any sense at all, and because some part of him that had spent 6 years alone on a quiet river had apparently decided, somewhere in the last month, that there were things in this world worth more than his own careful safety. Bula's jaw tightened. I do not like this plan. You don't have a better one. That does not mean I have to like it. They set it for the following night, when the moon would be bright enough to see by, but not so bright the beast would spot the trap before it was fully committed. Silas spent the day gathering rope and oil-soaked rags for torches, checking the mill bridge's rot and planking with careful, deliberate steps to be sure it would give way exactly where he needed it to and not a moment before, while Bula scouted the cave mouth twice more to be certain the creature had not shifted its den. When night came, they took their places, Bula hidden in the rocks above the gorge with her mended spear and a coil of rope, ready to drive the beast if it hesitated, and Silas on the bridge itself, lantern lit and swinging, making enough noise and enough scent of easy human prey to draw the thing's attention away from every other consideration in its simple, hungry mind. It came faster than either of them expected, a shrieking black shape bursting from the tree line with claws throwing up torn earth, and Silas's whole body screamed at him to run the moment he saw it, every animal instinct in him howling that this was madness, that no ferryman had any business standing his ground against a creature that size. He ran instead, but only far enough, only exactly as far as the plan required, out onto the center span of the rotten bridge where the boards groaned under his weight, the beast closing the gap behind him with terrible speed. And at the very last possible moment, he threw himself sideways off the bridge's edge, catching the rope Bula had already lowered from the rocks above, and the beast's own momentum carried it straight onto the weakened planks. The crack of splintering wood was the loudest sound Silas Morgan had ever heard in his life. The beast shrieked, clawed at empty air, and dropped through the collapsing bridge into the white churn of the gorge below, and the river that had carried Silas's father's barge and his own for 2 generations swallowed the creature whole and did not give it back. He hung from the rope over the gorge's edge, heart slamming against his ribs, until Bula's strong hands hauled him up and over the rocks and into a fierce, crushing embrace that knocked what little breath he had left clean out of him. "You absolute fool," she said into his hair, her voice shaking in a way he had never once heard from her, not even facing down Gruck, not even fighting the beast the first time with her arm torn open. "You beautiful, reckless, absolute fool. I told you I did not like this plan." "It worked, though," Silas managed, laughing weakly against her shoulder, feeling the tremor running through her powerful frame and understanding, with a jolt that went through him like the cold gorge water itself, that Bula Bloodhorn, fiercest scout clan Ashgrim had ever produced, had been afraid, for him, of losing him. "It worked," she agreed, pulling back just far enough to look at him, her eyes bright. "And if you ever do anything so reckless again, Silas Morgan, I will finish what the beast started myself." "Understood," he said, and kissed her there among the rocks with the gorge roaring below, and the dead thing's blood already washing downstream toward the town's water mill, and understood in that moment, with a certainty that settled somewhere very deep, that whatever came next, war or council or clan, he was not going to spend the rest of his life alone on a quiet river ever again. Word of the beast's death traveled fast once the mill's morning workers found the shattered bridge and the great gouged claw marks on what remained of the planking. It traveled faster still when a second body was found in the gorge's shallows 2 days later, an outrider from the besieging camp who had gone missing weeks before and been presumed a deserter, proof enough for anyone with eyes that whatever had haunted the mountain had been taking lives from both sides of the war impartially, and that it had somehow, at last, been ended. The town did not know who to credit. Rumor blamed everything from a rockslide to divine intervention to the besieging army's own dark sorcery turned against them. Reeve Aldous Pike, cautious as ever, simply thanked whatever gods watched over Fenwater Crossing and ordered the bridge rebuilt, and life within the walls, thin and siege-worn as it was, went on. It might have stayed that way, a private victory known only to 2 people on a mountain, if not for what Bula overheard 3 nights later from the ruined tower, watching the besieging camp's fires through the dark. "They are moving," she told Silas the moment he reached the top of the trail, water yoke barely set down before she seized his arm. "I have watched their drill fires for a month now, and tonight the pattern is wrong. They are massing at the north approach near the old grain road where your wall is weakest and your garrison thinnest. I know this maneuver, Silas. Goreth taught it to every scout in the clan before he ever taught us to track. They mean to storm the walls within 3 nights, while your town still believes the beast was the worst of its troubles this season. You're certain? I have spent my whole life reading fires and drill patterns for exactly this purpose. I am certain." Silas felt the old fear settle into his stomach, colder than any mountain night. "Then we have to tell the council. They exiled me to die on this ridge, Silas. They will not thank an orc's warning, however true." "They'll thank mine," he said. "And this time you're coming with me. I don't care what Rennick Vane or anyone else in that hall thinks of it. If you're right about the north approach, we don't have time for me to convince them second-hand of something you know firsthand." Bula's expression was unreadable in the dark, torn, he understood later, between the fear of what a crowded hall of frightened, war-weary townsfolk might do to an orc who walked in among them uninvited, and the simple, stubborn refusal to let her town know. She would not have called it hers then, but she would come to let his town fall to a maneuver she alone could name and warn against. "All right," she said finally. "For you, and because I would rather face a hall full of frightened humans than watch that army take a town where I have finally found something worth staying alive for." They came down the mountain together in the gray hour before dawn, and Silas Morgan led Bula Bloodhorn, exiled scout of Clan Ashgrim, in through the postern gate of Fenwater, crossing for the first time in the month since the council had cast her out to die. The town hall was already crowded with council members and off-duty guards discussing the strange lull in the siege lines when Silas pushed through the doors with Bula a half-step behind him, and the room went silent the way a held breath goes silent, every eye swinging toward the tall, green-skinned woman in torn scout leathers standing in the doorway of a hall that had sentenced her to death by exile a month before. "She has a warning," Silas said into that silence, his voice steadier than he felt. "The army means to storm the north wall within 3 nights. She's read their drill fires. She knows Ashgrim tactics better than any watchman on our walls." "She is Ashgrim," someone shouted from the back, and the word landed like a struck bell, setting off a ripple of angry murmuring that swelled fast toward something uglier. Rennick Vane, the guard captain, stepped forward with his hand already resting on his belt knife, his face twisted with an old soldier's grief and hatred both. "You brought an enemy scout into this hall, ferryman, while our walls stand thin and our men die on the mountain to things no one can name. How do we know this is warning and not the very treachery that led that beast to our sentries in the first place?" "Because I killed the beast," Silas said, loud enough to carry. "With her help. 3 nights passed at the old mill bridge. That's why the bridge is broken, Captain, not rockslide, not sorcery. She's the reason your town isn't burying more sentries this week, and she's the reason you might not lose the north wall 3 nights from now if anyone in this room has the sense to listen." The murmuring did not stop. If anything, it grew, fear and old hatred feeding each other the way fire feeds on dry brush. And Silas saw too late the way Rennick Vane's grief-twisted face had stopped being merely angry and gone somewhere colder, somewhere final, the moment his hand found the hilt of the knife at his belt and drew it clear. "I will not stand in a hall with an orc blade at my back," Rennick said, and lunged. It happened faster than thought. The knife was meant for Bula, for the exile, for the enemy. The whole terrified room had already decided she must be regardless of any warning she carried. And Silas Morgan, who had never in his life held a weapon in anger before 3 nights ago on a rotten bridge, saw the blade coming and did the only thing his body seemed to know how to do. He threw himself in front of it. The knife caught him across the forearm as he flung it up to shield her, a hot line of pain that dropped him to one knee with a shout, blood welling bright and immediate through his sleeve, and the whole crowded hall went utterly, absolutely silent, as though the sight of a man bleeding to protect an orc had struck every tongue in the room dumb at once. Bula Bloodhorn did not make a sound. She simply moved, faster than anyone in that hall had ever seen a person move, and had Rennick Vane's knife hand pinned and twisted behind his back before he had even finished the follow-through of his lunge. The man's own weapon wrenched from his grip and clattering across the stone floor. She could have broken his arm. Every line of her body screamed with the readiness to do exactly that, and worse besides. Instead, she held him pinned, shaking with a fury Silas could feel radiating off her like heat from a forge, and said, low and terrible and perfectly clear to every soul in that hall, "This man," she said, "climbed a mountain every single night for a month to bring me water when your own council left me to die of thirst for the crime of refusing to murder children. He fought a beast at my side with nothing but a boat hook and his own stubborn heart. He has just bled in front of all of you to shield me from a coward's blade, and if any one of you thinks I will let that sacrifice go unanswered, You have understood nothing at all about who I am." She released Rennick Vane with a shove that sent him stumbling into the crowd, and turned instead to Silas, dropping to her knees beside him without a shred of hesitation, tearing a strip from her own leather sleeve to bind the wound with hands that trembled just slightly, for the first time since he had known her. "You did not have to do that," she said, low only for him, though the whole hall could hear it anyway in the ringing silence. "You did not have to bleed for me." "Seemed like the thing to do," Silas said, through gritted teeth, trying and failing to keep the pain out of his voice. "You've been protecting me since the day we met, Bula. Seemed only fair I finally got a turn." Something broke open in her face then, something fierce and raw and entirely undisguised, and she pressed her forehead briefly to his, careless of the blood, careless of the watching hall, before she rose and turned back to face the room with the full terrible dignity of everything she had survived. "Believe my warning or not," she said to the council, to Reeve Aldous Pike, who stood pale and shaken near the front of the hall, "the north wall falls in 3 nights if you do not reinforce it now. I have no reason left to lie to you. I gave up my clan for a principle you cannot even guess at, and I have spent a month proving with my own hands, again and again, that I would rather die defending this town than see harm come to the one man in it who ever once treated me like I was worth saving." The hall was quiet for a long, long moment. Then Reeve Aldous Pike, gray-bearded and grieving 2 sons already lost to old wars, stepped forward and looked at the bloodied bandage on Silas Morgan's arm, and at the fierce, unyielding orc woman standing guard over him in the middle of his own town hall, and made the only decision left to a man who had run out of easy answers. "Reinforce the north wall," he said to Rennick Vane, who had gone white and silent in the crowd's grip. "Every able body we have, starting tonight. And someone fetch the healer for that arm before this ferryman bleeds out on my floor arguing with all of you. It was not forgiveness. It was not welcome, not yet, not fully. But it was a beginning, and Silas Morgan, watching Bula Bloodhorn stand tall and unbroken in a hall that had exiled her to die a month before, thought it was perhaps the finest beginning he had ever seen. The next 3 nights passed in a blur of frantic preparation. The whole town turned out to reinforce the north wall's crumbling stonework, Bula's knowledge of Ashgrim tactics guiding the garrison's placement of what few archers and spearmen the siege-thinned watch could still muster. Silas, arm bandaged and aching, spent those nights running messages between the wall and the council hall, and every spare hour he could steal he spent beside Bula, watching her direct the town's meager defenses with the same fierce competence she had once used to scout for the very army now camped outside their gates. The assault came on the 3rd night exactly as she had predicted, a surge of orc warriors against the weakened north approach under cover of a driving rain, and it broke against Fenwater Crossing's reinforced walls and warned garrison like a wave against a rock that had, against all odds, learned to hold. The town's losses were few. The besieging armies, by the grim accounting of the watch the next morning, were not. It was in the wreckage of that failed assault that the siege itself finally began to crack. Gruck Ironjaw, it emerged 3 days later through a nervous parley under a truce flag, had used the chaos of the failed attack and the leaderless confusion left by Goreth Ashgrim's death to challenge the clan's remaining war council directly, arguing before the assembled warband that a siege which could not even take a half-starved market town, that lost warriors to unnamed beasts and unbreakable walls both, brought the clan more shame than any retreat ever could. Whatever else lived in Gruck Ironjaw's heart, pride in his clan's name ran deeper than his wounded pride over Bula's rejection, and he carried the argument. Within the week, the besieging war host struck its camp and withdrew east through the mountain passes, leaving Fenwater Crossing bruised, hungry, and free for the first time in nearly 2 months. The town's relief, when word spread that the siege lines had gone quiet and the enemy fires had guttered and died along the far riverbank, was a wild, disbelieving joy that spilled out into the streets and the market square, strangers embracing strangers, the tavern throwing open its doors and pouring free ale until the barrels ran dry. And somewhere in the middle of that joy, quiet and mostly unremarked in the general celebration, Reeve Aldous Pike found Silas Morgan and Bula Bloodhorn standing together near the postern gate, and told them gruffly that whatever the council's original sentence had been, it seemed to him a woman who had saved the town twice over, from beast and from siege both, had more than earned the right to walk through Fenwater crossing streets as a free woman, rather than an exile clinging to a ruined tower on the ridge. It was not everyone's blessing. There were still those in town, Rennick Vane loudest among them even after his public humiliation, who eyed Bula with suspicion, and would for a long while yet. But it was enough of a blessing, freely given by the man who had once signed her death sentence, that Silas felt something in his chest, a knot that had been tight with worry since the night he first climbed the mountain with a yoke on his shoulders. That evening, with the town still celebrating below and the first stars coming out over the mountain, Bula Bloodhorn took Silas Morgan's hand and led him, without a word of explanation, back up the familiar trail toward the ruined signal tower on the ridge, the same path he had climbed every single night for a month, water sloshing at his shoulders, not knowing yet what it would come to mean. "Where are we going?" he asked, though some part of him already understood. "Home," she said simply. "Or what will be, if you'll have it. I have slept on that ridge for 2 months now, Silas Morgan, first in exile and then in something else entirely, and I find I do not wish to sleep anywhere else, not while you are the reason I have anything at all left to sleep peacefully toward." They reached the tower as the last light drained out of the sky. The whole valley spread below them, the river a dark ribbon threading past the walls of a town that had, against every hard old history between their two peoples, chosen in the end to let them both belong to it. Bula turned to him there under the open sky, and there was nothing careful or hesitant left in her expression at all, only that same fierce hunger he had first tasted the night she chose him over Gruck, deepened now by everything they had survived together since. "I told Gruck I chose you," she said, low, her hands finding the front of his shirt the way they had that first night. "I meant it as truth. I did not yet understand that night how deep that choosing would go." Her thumb traced along his jaw, gentle despite the strength coiled in every line of her. "Among my people, there is a custom, for a woman who has found the mate she means to keep for the rest of her life. She does not ask permission of clan or council. She simply claims him under open sky, where the mountain and the stars themselves stand witness, and there is no ceremony after that needs any other blessing." "Then claim me," Silas Morgan said, and his voice did not shake at all, though his heart was pounding harder than it had even hanging from a rope over the gorge. "I've been yours since the first night you took that water out of my hands and told me your name like it was a gift instead of a formality. I just didn't have the sense to say it out loud until now." Bula Bloodhorn laughed, that low startled sound he loved more than any other in the world, and pulled him close. And there on the ridge where he had carried water up the mountain every night for a month, where a beast had nearly killed him, and a rival had nearly claimed her, and a knife had nearly cut short everything they had only just begun to build, she kissed him with a hunger and a tenderness both that left no room in either of them for anything else at all. The stars turned slowly overhead, and the town's celebration fires burned small and warm far below, and up on the ridge, in the shelter of the old ruined tower that had once been meant as a place to die alone, Bula Bloodhorn and Silas Morgan found instead, in each other's arms, exactly the opposite of everything that mountain had once promised them. They stayed there long into the night, wrapped together against the mountain chill, and when dawn came pale and gold over the eastern passes where an army had once camped and now camped no longer, Silas woke to find Bula already awake beside him, watching the sunrise with an expression of quiet, unguarded peace he had never once seen on her face in all the weeks of her exile. "What are you thinking?" he asked, voice still rough with sleep. "That I have spent my whole life being useful," she said. "Useful to Gorath, useful to the clan, useful even to your council once they finally deign to listen. I have never simply been wanted, Silas Morgan, not for my own sake and nothing else, until a ferryman climbed a mountain with buckets on a yoke for a month and asked nothing of me in return but the chance to know my name. You're more than useful to me, Silas said, pulling her closer against the morning cold. You're the reason I've got a reason to keep climbing anything at all. Good, Bula Bloodhorn said, fierce and warm and entirely his. Because I do not intend to let you stop, not for the rest of whatever years this stubborn heart of yours has left to give me. Below them, Fenwater Crossing woke to its first siege-free morning in 2 months, market stalls opening, the river running clear and unguarded past walls that it held, and somewhere down that same worn trail a water yoke lay forgotten where he had left it, no longer needed, its purpose long since spent and replaced by something far more lasting than any daily errand of mercy had ever promised to become. They walked down the mountain together that morning, hand in hand, into a town that had exiled her and nearly killed him both and would, in time, learn to call them simply Silas and Bula, the ferryman and his orc wife, as unremarkable and as treasured a fixture of Fenwater Crossing streets as the river itself. The gray lily sailed again within the month, once the trade roads cleared and the bridge upstream was rebuilt, and it carried from that season onward 2 figures at its rudder instead of one, a ferryman who had once been the loneliest man on the river, and beside him always, fierce and devoted and utterly unashamed of the love that had found them both on a mountain neither of them had ever expected to survive, the woman who had chosen him and kept choosing him every single day since.